So, as I say, I'm Duncan Bennett. I'm Managing Director of Not Sport, hosting the Q&A. I'm very much the Q of the very much the Q of the Q&A for the next hour. And I'm delighted to welcome Danny Kerry to talk about how the attributes that athletes can translate to business. And just as a little bit of intro to Danny, Danny is the most successful coach in British hockey history, having led England and GB women to numerous successes, most notably the 2016 Olympic gold. With Olympics being delayed a year, first question I was going to ask you, Danny, is whether there's a new approach to the cycle through to 2021 now, given the year's delay, and how do your decisions pre-COVID, assuming you're working to, of course, this summer's Olympics, how do they change for you as a leader and for the players that we're expecting to sort of board the plane to Tokyo this summer rather than next year?
Yes, so it's a multifaceted question, Duncan. Thanks. If I start with the last part of that, which is how sort of COVID has impacted on some of those athletes and their plans, I think the most significant has really been those athletes who are sort of potentially planning to finish their hockey careers and move on into taking up roles and posts, and also family planning. And it's been really significant for them to sort of suddenly have those plans, like getting married, taking up job offers, and all of a sudden, hang on a minute, can we still do that? And so we have a fantastic lady called Emma Mitchell who works in performance lifestyle. And I would say she was probably our busiest member of staff when the sort of lockdown happened, and spent quite a good period of time working with those athletes to work through, are we going to keep going as an athlete through to Tokyo 21, or are we going to stay with the plans that they had? So that's been quite a significant piece of work, and looking after sort of those athletes' plans, and I followed up with conversations with those athletes as well. In terms of our plan, our performance plan to Tokyo, I think like any coach, they probably back themselves and think, okay, an extra year, that'll make us better. So on a personal level, it's actually been, I do feel we'll be stronger in Tokyo 21. My reason for feeling that is 2018, I had a very busy year with the women, so Commonwealth Games and the World Cup, and then literally straight out of the Women's World Cup, straight into a Men's World Cup at the back end of 2018. Out of that, straight into the new Pro League, and out of that into Olympic qualification, and then we've sort of had the sort of what we've had happen. So it's actually allowed me to sort of draw a bit of a breath and look at how we can use this year, get my ducks in a row. And the sort of phrase that I've been discussing with the athletes is sort of Einstein, as simple as possible, but no simpler. And that's the route we've taken to Tokyo 21. And then just getting the balance right in the lockdown is not bombarding as you may want to do as a head coach. It's sort of like, right, great, we'll use this lockdown and we'll do everything we can do. It's actually been sort of rein it in and let the athletes be in a little bit of peace. Let them actually enjoy a rare moment of when they're not chasing their tails as athletes, and just make sure they're kind of on top of some of their physical maintenance, and then just allowing them to be a little bit.
And it sounds like you feel in a positive place then, moving into that, and you're back at Bisham, I believe, as of last week. So it's sort of back into the hard work planning for next summer. Yeah,
I feel we're relatively well positioned in terms of Tokyo 21. I think we're probably a little bit under people's radar. I think people sort of perceive us as the type of side that, if we have a good day, we can be competitive, but we're perhaps not consistent enough. And I've shared with the men's group about why we haven't perhaps been consistent enough, but that's actually almost been semi-deliberate. We've been exploring different ways of playing and exploring different combinations, and we're very much going to go much more into a sort of execute mode now rather than explore mode. And I think we'll be stronger for it. So I do feel optimistic. I do feel that that's been exceptional in a good place. And I think we've used the 18 months since I've been involved to really understand what the group is capable of. and then come to a plan of where we're going to go, rather than this is the plan and not really knowing what they're capable of. So I am feeling pretty good about it. Last week, first week back, it was great to see the lads. They were all in good spirits. They were really happy to be back on the pitch. We've just got this sort of frustrating unknown period now of sort of socially distanced training, which is new to all of us. But so far, so good.
Excellent. And focusing on the topic of the session, you mentioned there that there are players that it's come out into the media and ether that were looking to end their careers after this summer's Olympics, if it had happened. And you mentioned that there was Emma Mitchell involved at England Hockey in terms of that transition. I'm just interested to know whether you think that is a move that governing bodies like England Hockey are doing to a greater degree than historically, and whether you think there's more that can be done to prepare the athletes post-playing career.
I'm exceptionally proud of England and GB Hockey. I think we're held, in fact I don't think, I know we're held as a bit of a shining example to the other Olympic sports, and now we're creating a lot of interest from some of the professional sports. So Emma has been in post almost as long as I have, which is an awfully long time. And we've put a huge array of work and time and energy into what Emma would describe as sort of dual identities as athletes and their identities outside of their hockey athlete. If I give you a little quick example of the group from the women Rio 2016, a squad of 31. But you're looking at, I've just got a few stats, which I'm just going to read a screen, just read off. So 23 of those combined their GB training with undergraduate or postgraduate opportunities. So 30 degrees, 5 masters, 2 PhDs, 14 athletes were involved in some sort of work outside of hockey, either part-time or internships or placements. Holly Webb, who scored the winning goal in the Olympic final, she has worked part-time with DEFRA, the Department of Agriculture, and has sort of been taking her accounting exams for all that. And I can literally go on and on. We're very, very proud of how we understand our more moral obligation to look after these athletes. And so once we're looking after them from the wider picture, but it is also good, makes good performance sense. These people understand their role as athletes but have it in perspective, and that building that perspective and building some of those skills outside of them being an athlete transfers back into the sporting domain. So yeah, we're really proud of what we do at England Hockey and GB Hockey.
And again, I'm going to read some stats now as well, so I'm going to follow your lead on this. And I'm not asking you to comment on other sports necessarily, but just doing some research in the lead up to this. In terms of football alone, there's in the Guardian, David Cullen reported 12,000 boys in the pro club academy system, hundreds released each year. Only 10% will sign a pro contract. The other 90% will obviously have to get used to the fact that they've spent potentially up to 10 years in vain pursuing that goal. The PFA estimate that 700 professional footballers, not the youth players, are released by clubs each year. But the biggest attrition rate is with young players. And this is something I've spoke to Alex Gidman, a former cricketer, about, who was looking to, and still is, engaging with young professional or former professional sportsmen to get them into business. And it's, in my opinion, and from what you said, you agree, a huge issue morally for sport. But as well as being that responsibility for sport, it's also, in my opinion, a huge opportunity for businesses like ourselves to find these young, talented, driven people. So I'm interested to ask you, how can business adapt their recruitment strategies to give athletes a fairer opportunity compared to somebody that's been in the work environment and has got as they use, traditional CV?
Yeah, so of course I have a bias, I have a view of our world, and I don't claim to understand the business world. I think if I if I'm in the process of recruiting, which I often am for staff for a program, I think what I'm fundamentally looking for are qualities and skills. And I'm trying to understand how those qualities and skills can then be essentially deployed effectively within our team. Will they fit? Will they be a good fit for our program? So, I'm talking very much from the Olympic team sport perspective. I just look at the types of qualities and skills that are developed in our GB program, and through experience and from talking to some pretty impressive employers who have used our athletes in internships and placements, they find that the qualities and skills that the athletes come with are kind of, can be difficult to find. So, ability to be self-organizers, attributing their success and failure to themselves first, understanding where the attribution, where the responsibility lays with themselves, the ability to know themselves, self-awareness, awareness of others, having perspective of the greater needs of the system, whether it be that a team or England Hockey or Great Britain Hockey or Team GB, and understanding there are sort of layers of responsibility to wider stakeholders. All of these types of qualities and skills, they don't necessarily come into our program with those, but through their time with us, they are skills that by default they have to develop in order for them to be successful. So it may not say on the tin, this athlete has experience in accountancy or in sales and marketing, but inherently, I would argue pretty strongly that the types of qualities are probably the qualities you're going to require in the workplace. So we've been, through the work of Emma Mitchell, incredibly successful at deploying a very wide network and tapping into this network of employers and higher education institutes, and building a sort of pathway which we can help the athletes navigate. So as and when they do finish their athletic careers, they're well positioned. And the other thing we've probably found is they may feel they're behind the curve compared to their peers who may have come straight out of university and into the business world. But what we do tend to find is they kind of may come in at a slightly lower level, but their trajectory often then seems to be very, very quick, and reasonably quickly they either catch up or overtake some of their peers because some of the qualities I've mentioned.
And you mentioned earlier that England Hockey being something of a leading light in this. Are you aware of the governing bodies sort of following the path that you've led, or asking how you do it, and maybe making their own decisions as to how it will fit for their sort of players and vision?
Yeah, so I think UK Sport, who is our high performance funding agency, what they have done incredibly successfully over, well, really probably since around 96, 2000, has built essentially a big high performance system, and their ability from the different sports to learn off one another has been the envy of the world, really. And hockey is very much tapped into by other sports to understand how we've taken this concept of performance lifestyle, and rather than seeing it as some person who sits at the end of the corridor and occasionally the athletes, get a bit worried about what their career might be and have the occasional chat, we've embedded it into our programs. I mean, if I bring that to life for you, our entire centralized week has built within it the Wednesday dual aspiration day. So it is a physical recovery day, but it's also an expectation around how they use that day for their identities and careers and lives after hockey, and we protect that day. So if you're a high performance coach and you look at that, you can say, well, it's a whole day that you're not training, you're not doing stuff. We look at that and think actually it's preparing them, it's morally looking after them for their future careers, but also it actually benefits them. It gives them perspective. It allows them to not be worrying about their career as they come towards the final months and weeks of Olympic Games. And often the skills and qualities that they take or bring back from their internships or placements, whether that's Coots Bank or their work in an A&E unit or something like that, those qualities come back into our program and are really useful.
And does that outreach support, if I can call it that, extend beyond the men's and women's GB teams at adult age all the way through the different age groups? So the players that you know are in the development age groups also get that support if they don't progress to you know, teams.
So I think it's very mature and very evolved in the senior program. I know for a fact that through our national age groups pathway, so those who are playing representative England sort of juniors, there are a lot of conversations within those programs around essentially their planning for the sort of options and choices around which institutions they go to study, how that fits with their career aspirations and their athlete aspirations. And we've had a number of different so there are government initiatives. It used to be called the Advanced Apprenticeship and Sporting Excellence, but there have been different initiatives that we've, as hockey, have sort of grabbed onto and used to help facilitate and support athletes, both in terms of their athletic identities and also their sort of career aspirations. It's not as evolved as the senior level because the commitment senior level is essentially full time. But we do work with our pathway athletes on making good choices, helping them understand the choices that they're presented with, and providing them with differing views, and making them understand that ultimately our job is to support, provide guidance, and they help them to make the right decisions.
And do you think, before we move on to sort of the next section of the session, do you think there's more that business can do to engage with UK sports, England hockey, other governing bodies to, as I mentioned earlier, sort of use a different recruitment strategy than just posting a job description on LinkedIn and seeing what, you know, it ostensibly tends to be the same faces applying for jobs each time. So I'm just wondering if there's an encouragement for those watching from a business sector could actually you know, engage directly with the governing bodies if there was a platform to do so.
So I would struggle to articulate what the approach is from sort of wider business consultancy world. What I would say is those businesses and those different arenas and spheres that have become part of our network have stayed with us, which is a good sign, and continue to recruit our athletes into roles and posts. So the opportunity is certainly there, and they obviously stay for a reason. So, you know, if there are prospective employers on this webinar and they are thinking about that, then either through UK Sport, the English Institute of Sport, Performance Lifestyle Network, or direct to Olympic bodies. So, for example, Emma Mitchell, who works for English Institute of Sport, and we contract her to work for us full time. You know, the avenues are there. We are constantly looking to build our network wider and wider and wider. And I think now more and more Olympic sports have understood how important this is, and I think the opportunity is growing in other sports as well.
Absolutely. And we've touched on it already, but just perhaps to drill down a little bit in terms of the attributes that you see athletes, perhaps regardless of sport, seeing consistently in your experience over your time as a coach, and those attributes you've mentioned: self-organisation, self-responsibility, self-awareness, the fact they're naturally team players coming from a team environment. How do they, first of all, before we get into how it translates to business, how are they addressed by yourselves as leaders within the senior organisation, and how do you identify them to contribute to the individuals and the collective success of the group?
So I think if I've understood your question correctly, Duncan, I sort of have some big, as a head of the programme, some big sort of ticket items that I believe are qualities that athletes are going to require if they're going to be successful in the Olympic domain. and probably through life, but certainly in the Olympic domain. And so then it's really beholden on me as the leader of the program to make sure the environment affords them the opportunity to develop those qualities and skills. So, for example, one of the things I'm very, very proud about through my time with the women and now working hard with the men is that, you know, one of the responsibilities of leaders is to generate a density of leaders or other leaders. How you do that with that goal in mind is very much about providing opportunities in your environment for people to lead. And there are all sorts of different ways that that can manifest itself. There are some very obvious ones. So the ability to rotate captaincy leadership type roles in training and in match play. And then there are more subtle ones where we may have a particular project that we need to run, and we actually may empower some of those athletes. Okay, you guys actually come with a set of skills, expertise. So please, can you go away, look at this, come back and present. Now, again, as the head coach, what you're trying to do is understand where that current squad is on that journey and just scaffolding that subtly over time, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. By the time I sort of left, by the time we got to Rio 2016, they had some very experienced people who were very adept at leading, not just the captain, Kate Richardson-Walsh, but a whole raft of other individuals. So for me, there's a nice density of people who had lots of leadership qualities and skills that had been deliberately built up subtly over time. With the men, similar process going on, different starting points, different groups. So again, subtle, providing the subtle scaffolding to start moving their ability to own and take responsibility for decisions, to start providing feedback to how the program may run. So as long as you have those big overarching ideas of what are the qualities that you want to generate in people, your job then as a leader is to ensure your environment affords the opportunities to develop them. And unintentionally, I've certainly been guilty of this, unintentionally at times, as the person in the position of leadership, you may unwittingly be preventing some of the growth of your individuals by the way you lead. So I'm always mindful of that. So when is the time to sort of allow the space for people to find their own way, and when is the time for you to be a little bit more directive around how things are done? And sort of navigating that through experience is the role, I think, of a leader, to try and produce more leaders.
And do you find it's malleable, that those core attributes, qualities that you identify for leadership? We'll come on to that in a second, but as players come into the senior group, do you still find that they're malleable and able to adapt?
100%. Often when you feel they're not malleable, it's probably more to do with your limitation to see their perspective. Often when I get it wrong, and you do get it wrong, you know, you're talking 30 plus athletes and 14 odd staff, there will be times when you're thinking, I can't get through to this person, you know, it's just not working. Particularly challenging can be adolescence. So we know that adolescence can run into the mid to late 20s, and working with adolescents requires a certain set of skills. And I've traditionally struggled with some of these talented adolescents and the inability to connect with them. But if you have the ability to then, start seeing it from their perspective and working with that rather than just butting heads against it, which I've definitely done, you'd be amazed at the suddenly sort of transformative effect that can have. Now, don't get me wrong, you know, if you were to step into our environment, you would see all of the things you would expect to see in any workplace environment, all the tensions, potential conflicts, all the stuff. But I think what we have done well is recognise we've got this range of people. They come in at different points with different qualities and experiences, and we are creating a good environment to find the right way to interact with that individual and bring the best out of them. And at times, sometimes it's deliberate to make it difficult, and it's deliberate to not always be going toward them, but expect them to come towards us. And reading sort of social media at the moment, there's a lot about, you know, we've got to be brilliant communicators, we've got to have these brilliant relationships, and we do. Equally, if you're constantly filling that space, then you're not expecting those athletes to be doing the same back the other way. So it's moving up and down the continuum to find what's going to get and help support those athletes to build the qualities that they're going to need in the environment they want to perform in.
And I was watching, just picking up on that, I was watching Steve Borthwick's first interview as coach at my team, Leicester Tigers. Yeah, I'll get Leicester in as much as I can through the next, well, we've got left half now. But he was saying, it's touching on what you said about diverse players, engaging with them, getting them to buy into what he's obviously looking to do going forward. But he also made what I thought was an interesting point, was the blend of his coaches has been specifically designed and recruited to complement where he's perhaps not, I'm putting words in his mouth now, but as strong. And do you do that with your coaches? So perhaps you mentioned that you struggle with the adolescents ages and communicating there. Does that mean that you are trying to find that blend of coaches that can fill those gaps?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk. We've literally just completed a recruitment for a new assistant coach, and when we sat down as a panel, we deliberately asked almost that question: is okay in terms of fit and in terms of skill mix. What to use our psychologist terms? What's the empty chair? What are we missing within our staff group? Now, you may have that empty chair, and the candidates came through may not necessarily fill it, and in an ideal world they would, but at least you know that is the empty chair, that is the qualities and skills. So now, as the head of the program, that's always in my head a little bit. So Russell, who is unfortunately leaving us to return back to Germany for family reasons, he brings a real extroversion, a real energy, a real point of difference. And we're conscious we're losing that. So we've been thinking about that with recruitment in mind, not necessarily going to replace light for light, but certainly mindful of that qualities and skills are going to be leaving our program. What do we need to be mindful of or bring in?
And then addressing directly the point you made about identifying the qualities of leaders within the squad, and I guess that's within your coaching as well, as you just mentioned. Can you give us a bit of a flavour as to what those exact qualities are that you're looking to build on within your playing group?
Yeah, so some are a little, a little bit basic. Is, do people want the responsibility and accountability that come with leadership? Often the reasons people may be reticent to step in those roles is it may impact on them personally in some of their relationships. You know, your ability to skillfully have potentially difficult conversations or conversations that may have conflict inherent in them and maintain your relationship or relationships is something that some people are reticent to do. You know, that comes with leadership. So if I think about, let's take Kate from the women's squad, she could challenge people with an authenticity that, and people realize it was coming from a well-intentioned space. We want to be better. This is our goal. This is what we're trying to achieve. This is not a personal attack. It may feel like that temporarily, but this is where we're going. So you're looking for people fundamentally who are, you know, willing to take responsibility, willing to understand there's a bigger picture than just maintaining personal relationships, and that with time you can do both. It can be challenging, but you can do both. So that's the first thing that we're sort of really looking for. Secondly, then it's probably around what we really do a lot of work around self-awareness. So do our athletes, all of them, not just those in position of leadership, understand themselves? Why do I feel the way I do when certain things happen? Why do I behave and interact the way I do? What is it in my formative life that's led me to have this sort of set of values? Why do I see the world in this way? And if we identify athletes with really that good self-insight, they're often well placed to understand that other people have a different view of the world. And then they're in a good place to then start able to regulate their behaviour to bring the best out of themselves and the best out of others. And then after that, I think we're looking for people who can own the space. Now, this is more your classic sort of the way people traditionally think about leaders. But own the space, have that presence, that's congruent for them. So not falsely trying to be sort of front in the room wearing their pants over their trousers, but through their natural way of being can make very salient points, make people think differently, bring people with them that works for them. So if I think about some of the way that Alex Danson would lead compared to the way Kate would lead, very different but highly impactful. If I look at the way Adam Dixon currently works in the men's squad, again, different to the two previous people, but again, effective. So having an element of presence and willing to take the responsibility and accountability, a large healthy dose of self-awareness which allows them to have awareness of others is sort of some of the key foundations that we're looking for and looking to develop, rather than just assuming it's there somehow untapped. Is creating lots of opportunities to develop those things.
So my next question was going to be how they translate to business, but these are exactly the same sorts of skills that businesses are looking for, every day of their business lives. And in terms of, if we paint a scenario of an athlete going out of a senior squad in hockey, going into the business world, how do you think a business can best harness those key pillars, if you can call it that, that you just described? Would that individual require a different approach to somebody coming out of university or somebody like myself that's worked their way through a business?
My strong sense is that Emma Mitchell and other staff work hard on this. Is that sometimes the athletes don't realise they have those qualities and skills, and they so do. They really do. But they only see them in the context of their athletic identities. Hockey player, international hockey player. When you start breaking it down, highly self-organised, incredibly resilient, constantly looking to ways that they can improve what they do, have to work with others, self-aware, aware of other, all of these qualities and skills, and you start to say, okay, these are, really good, high-level qualities and skills. You have to kind of educate and help those athletes understand it. I think then there's always the transition around their identity. So it's very hard for people, let's say, who've been in an Olympic program for 8, 12 years, to see themselves as something else. And I think that's possibly, if I were an employer, is opening their eyes to, these qualities and skills are going to be brilliant in this place. These are the types of things you can do, and this is what you can bring for us. Because I think athletes might struggle to make that step. And again, I think some of the internship, the works, the placements we do has helped greatly with that. And often our athletes come in and sort of say, oh, it's amazing. I fitted straight in, and some of the things that we do, that they're really interested in what we do in our performance world. So yeah, if I were a prospective employer, possibly I would make the emphasis around the possibility in front of these people and how their qualities and skills they have are what we're looking for, rather than perhaps more about the explicit knowledge of the role of the task in that job. I think that would be the trick.
Oh, that makes sense. And something that somebody, again, picking up on something you said there about their self-organisation, is actually something that somebody else in the build-up to this had mentioned to me as being potentially a negative. The perception that athletes are, and I use this word advisedly, but pampered. They have a program every week that tells them you will be here at this time, you will do this. Is that perception incorrect? Because that something directly said to me from another business was something that was perceived as a negative, if you like.
Yeah, it's definitely not the case in hockey. I think there are definitely elements that are provided for them. So say take a conditioning program, but there's good reasons for that. The level of expertise to put together for all of the types of conditioning they do and when they do it and why they do it. But again, what I would say is the nuance of that is, as those athletes' careers become better and they know their bodies well, the expectation is that they engage with the practitioner more to drive what it might look like in their formative years, in their younger years as an athlete. It's prescribed. And as they journey through, it becomes in combination with the conditioning coach. But certainly not mollycoddle, almost the other end of the spectrum. It's pretty unrelenting. It is high. You are supported, but we are asking people to go to places which are not by normal cultural norms. They're not normal, and asking people to think carefully about every meal they eat, to think about how they're going to organise their lives. So in their 2-week window that they've got a break, what are they going to do with it? How are they going to use it? How are they planning months, years in advance what their lives look like? That isn't mollycoddle. That's a particular discipline that comes with being an elite athlete. That may be different in other sporting domains, but I don't think that happens in the Olympic domains.
And you mentioned about conflict, challenging within the group, and I guess as coaches, that's not naturally part of the role that you do. Do you need that mix of personalities within a squad? Just as businesses, we look for a mix of personalities within a workplace. Is that critical to giving yourself the best chance of success?
I think the best way I can answer that is the different personalities and the real highs and the challenges that can come with that is where the good stuff lays. But you have to go through the challenging times to get to the good stuff. And so rather than trying to constantly seek a harmonious environment, it's more like challenges and conflict will come along. And when they come along, it's like, okay, let's work through those. So it's more, it does happen as the expectation, rather than sort of what I would sort of say false harmony is just embracing it. It happens. Let's learn from how we resolve some of the conflict. Where does it come from? Almost embrace it. I don't think we deliberately go out to create it. I don't think we look for conflict. I've heard people talking about that, but we don't do that because it will come up naturally. And then at times also there is an expectation at certain phases where life is tougher. So we had planned a particularly challenging trip to South Africa, but it didn't happen because of COVID. And we were going to, in a controlled and supported way, put the athletes into quite some challenging contexts. And that was to grow them. That was very much to grow some of the qualities around leadership, to grow their ability to work under pressure. And then you, like you do physiologically, you periodize what the program can feel like. So going into Olympic Games, the last few weeks, you want to be taking off pressure, not adding it. At other points in the program, you may want to be ramping it up so people learn how to deal with it, learn about themselves and how they respond in those moments.
And that's a topic of conversation. Matthew Syed released a book on this, I think last year, in terms of diversity within a group, diversity of thought. Is that something that you encourage outside of those that might stand up as leaders? Are you looking to encourage people to give you and the squad feedback across all areas? So
it's feedback. So if I talk personally, feedback is always something I'm nervous about. You constantly, as the head of the program, receiving it. So there's constant program reviews. About a month or two ago, I received one of my many 360s. So it's always something I'm nervous about, because I'm a proud man and I want to do as well as I can. And classically, there'll be 9 things that are, this is great, keep doing it. And that'll be the one thing. It'll be the one thing that I'll fixate on, and that's how I'm hardwired. I think we, in terms of the diversity question, I think we get the balance about right. You can always make a really compelling case as to have as diverse a views as possible. In my experience, though, at some point this is the route we are pursuing, because if you're flip-flopping around the place all of the time with different opposing views, you're not getting the traction you need. So sometimes having a clear sense of direction and then having enough people just challenge you about, okay, have you thought this through? And getting that balance right is the bit that I've worked on hard recently. Ironically, today I've got off. I had a Zoom call with one of the club coaches in the Premier National League, and I've asked them if I could send them footage of us playing and then critique stuff. So sort of getting some input from some other National League coaches, that you have to have an element of trust, because obviously some of our coding structures you wouldn't want going out wider to opponents. But yeah, seeking some wider input. I have a mentor, and I would say that my mentor, he's a clinical psychologist. He is brilliant for me. He really asks me questions that could get me reflecting in a whole different way. And I feel I'm quite a reflective guy, but he really asks me questions that really gets me going. And all of a sudden, after some of those sessions, I have a new lease of life. I've become quite inspired by a new avenue, a new way of thinking. But as I say, there's an optimum, and if you are constantly changing, it can prove problematic.
I think it's fair to say I've been there and done that. So I can wear the badge on learning that lesson myself. Interestingly, on your mentor side of things, is that something that's been relatively new, or is that something you've always had since you've been a sort of a coach at GB Hockey?
I've had a few. I've had a number at different points in time. The first one I ever had was a fascinating guy. He's a Hungarian guy called István Gorgeny, and he had been a psychiatrist in Hungary, but also the national water polo coach in Hungary, and had coached the Australian women's team to a gold medal in water polo. And through UK Sport, through their network, I was fascinated because he'd taken a team to a Home Olympics. I was taking a team to a Home Olympics in London, and there was some nice mutual wins, team sport. The current guy I work with, mentor, he's probably he's more interested in me as a human being and wider than my sort of identity as a hockey coach. And it's been really good, both professionally and personally.
And is that important to you to get that out of hockey, if you want to call it that, sort of view on things? I imagine it could be sort of a bit of an institutionalisation, if I can say it, if it's just within the GB hockey or the hockey world.
Yeah, in terms of the mentor, 100%. Having a different lens, a different perspective. I think the thing that is the role I have, and I'm sure it's the same in many people in positions of leadership, you're constantly either thinking about what has gone before or what's about to happen. Your ability to sort of live in the present is pretty difficult. And James, the guy who mentors me, has done a really great job at sort of helping me at times, when appropriate, live a little bit more in the present. And so he's allowed me to look at my life a little bit broader than just mentoring me in terms of being a high performance coach, just as a human being, really.
And we've mentioned sort of disagreement, and in some of the questions that I'm getting flung at me left, right, and centre, which is good. Yeah, that's what we want, by the way. And then we'll come on to the questions. We'll give it another 5 minutes, and then we'll get on to some of the questions that have been sent. In terms of that disagreement within a squad team environment, there's people relating it into business. A question from Joe Carroll, the head of Amazon Digital, whether there's more diverse backgrounds in a business environment to a squad environment at Bisham. And then coupled with that, somebody asking how do you manage disagreement within the squad if and when it happens, and whether that comes out of it being
diverse. Yeah, it's a really good question around the diversity of makeup of our squad. I wouldn't disagree. I think at the moment, hockey, it's sort of where it recruits sort of top flight players isn't that diverse. We have some BAME members within our group, and the age group is relatively narrow, sort of 10 years. So we don't necessarily have sort of sage sage experienced players of 40 plus years. They're somewhere between roughly 20 and 30 something. So yeah, possibly we don't get that diversity. I think what we do definitely get is diversity of experience. I think we get that in spadefuls. So you know, if I think about one of the first events with the men was taking the team to the World Cup in Bhubaneswar in India. We were there for a month. We were essentially cocooned away. The lads did some work with some of the local schools in Bhubaneswar, and some of those life experiences and some of that ability to see life in a different perspective comparative to people who lead a more, in inverted commas, normal life. I think we get good diversity of thought, but not necessarily a diverse group of athletes. There's often a huge amount of time and energy discussing about, you know, should England hockey and GB hockey be doing more to recruit from different sort of socioeconomic backgrounds, and we work. I know, having been a former board member, there's a huge amount of time and energy goes into it, and it is sort of it's you know, inches of trying to, you know, everyone wants to play football, and it's uphill, it's hard, and it's easy to sort of suggest that, you know, we don't do enough. There's huge amounts of initiatives. The ability to get traction is challenging. It is challenging. Sorry, there was a conflict bit of that. Apologies, Duncan. There was a conversation about conflict and diversity.
Yeah.
I think the conflict tends to come when there's a clash of values, and I think, again, something we do well in hockey is we create a shared collaboration of this is what we're trying to achieve, and this is the sort of values we're going to live by. And then when people step outside of those sets of values, I think we're quite good at trying to understand first why they have, what sits behind that behaviour, rather than quick to judge and quick to sort of condemn. We're quite good at, all right, that doesn't sit well with us, but why have you done that? Again, don't get me wrong, we're not perfect, and there's definitely times where we don't do that well, but I think on the whole pretty good. And I think it's because we invest time and energy and collaboratively trying to agree, this is where we're going, this is how we're going to do it, and these are the values we're going to live by. And that is a collaborative event. So conflict there in that environment tends to get managed by the culture. And I think something I was very proud of with the women's programme, you sort of resolve conflict through good culture, good environment. And I think the lads are in a great place with that as well.
That's great. My final sort of question, we spoke about leadership and the traits and the attributes that has inherent within it. I remember Dave Brailsford being asked whether he could see him moving from cycling into other sports and being equally successful because of the core leadership traits that he would bring and the systems he puts into place. I think Clive Woodward's an example of where he tried to go from rugby into football 15 years or so ago. I'm just wondering if you believe that leadership is transferable, and whilst you're in hockey, the tenets of what your leadership brings would work in different environments.
I do feel it's transferable. So our current performance director, Ed Barney, has come from a sailing background, an academic sailing background, and is doing a really good job. I do feel it's transferable. Like any successful transition, I think your ability to reserve judgment, understand the context before you go wading in with a great big change project, I think that's a sign of a good leader. But I certainly feel it's possible, and I know, again, in the UK sport high performance system, so within the Olympic, Paralympic sports, that does happen. Yeah. I've had a couple of interesting sort of options with other sports, but I kind of love what I do currently. So yeah, I've not pursued those. But definitely feel it transfers. I spend quite a bit of time I say I spend a lot of time. I do the odd little bit of consultancy for Lane 4 from time to time, going to businesses, working with sort of, or working with more discussions around leadership with sort of executive boards. And I love that. I find that fascinating. One of the most interesting ones recently was with the atomic weapons establishment, which, you know, sitting next to the boss of the atomic weapons establishment, discussing, you know, essentially buildings. I made a mistake of saying, you know, you sit over and run something that we hope never to use. And he goes, we use it every day. And I was like, it's a deterrent. And, you know, people, you know, it has to be a believable deterrent. It has to operate and function. And so it works every day because it's a deterrent. So whether you philosophically believe with them or not is not the case. Is not the important bit. It's the fact that, you know, the leadership demands are the same and the quality and skills required are the same, just very polar, different contexts.
I think that's the key, isn't it? I think that's why people find leadership fascinating, because they want to hear from the likes of yourselves how you work, and then hopefully translate that into wherever they are, whether that's business or whatever it may be. Well, thanks, Danny. If you're happy, we can field a few questions here. I know that we've spoke before we started that if we overrun by 5-10 minutes, it's okay. So if you don't mind,
Absolutely.
get through.
Yeah,
great. So we've had a question from David Wren from Sheffield Hockey Club and Business School in Sheffield as well. Prior to the selection for Tokyo next year, there's sort of almost two things running parallel. One, squad goal to become the best team in the world, as he's put it. But then also individually, players will have the squad goal, but also the personal goal to make sure that they're on the plane to Japan, and by association, perhaps person X competing for that place isn't. And how do you manage that tension?
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, so it's the paradox, and the discussion I always have very explicitly with athletes and with the squad is that's the paradox of you actually you stand your greatest chance of being selected by doing your best by your teammate that you're competing with. So actually you behaving, performing in a way that actually gets the best out of the teammate that you're competing with is also your best route to being selected, and that is a paradoxical situation. It's something that athletes, I think, quickly get their head around. Selection is always the most challenging period, but I think what we've done well, again, something I'm proud of, is I will always say to the athletes, selection isn't a point in time. Selection is a continuously ongoing process. So my responsibility is to always allow athletes know exactly where they stand. So formally, every quarter, the end conversation in their quarterly review is, if we were selecting for a major tournament tomorrow, this is where you stand. So they know that and they can work with that. So it's an ongoing process. And then they go away and then develop elements of, sorry, I'm just getting a phone call, let's decline that. So they then start to build their development plan based on the feedback we've given them and based on where their trajectory is for selection. But it's a great question. It is the paradox of team sport. I think my job is to be explicit that your best chance of being selected is to do the best by the person who's competing for your space.
Fantastic, thank you. Fiona Lane has, I think via the chat, asked, what would you say has been your single most effective way of maintaining the closeness and bond of the team whilst they've been unable to get together in person? And then second sort of question, how do you detect remotely, this is using Teams, Zooms, those who might be drifting a bit, to quote? Yeah,
so I don't mind sharing this. I am not, you know, it's not my natural gift to be sort of the warm and cuddly, extroversion type leader. That's not my. I like to think I can do it from time to time, but you know, there are people much better at it than me. And what we've done in terms of this example, we've and it's rather cliche, but we created what we call connected groups. So we have 5 members in our current leadership group. Each of those took a small group of five other athletes. and they sort of met up either once a week or every couple of weeks, just to sit and check in with one another. So we called it connected groups, so they stayed connected. And then I would check in with the leadership group, understand any issues that are arising, understand people who may be struggling. And what you got was this mutually supportive set of network that just looked out for one another. So there was one athlete in particular that struggled early on when the Olympics wasn't going to happen. And it was amazing. You could hear all of a sudden it's just feeding in, okay, we need to look at this guy. Can we just keep checking with them? You know, I'm then picking up saying, yeah, do you want to catch up? Want to have a chat? And next thing they start opening up to you. So we create, so our way was these connected groups. There are other staff, so Emma Mitchell is performance lifestyle. We have Tim as our psychologist, and then one of some of our my assistant coaches are very, very good at sort of putting an arm around an athlete and making them feel secure and supported. I can do it. I'm not as good at it as some of the other staff, but that's your job as a leader to use your other staff in what works best for the athletes.
Looking through the questions, people love conflict. There's questions about how you deal with conflict here. I don't know what they're trying to say. 3 tips for building the best coach-athlete relationship. If you can boil it down to 3. That's from Ron.
I would probably boil it down to 1, and that's to use a sort of a Stephen Covey type quote, which was seek first to understand in order to be understood. So for those of you old enough, then you may have read the book. There's the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey, and one of the chapters is seek first to understand in order to be understood. And I think your ability to show genuine interest and warmth around other people's context, their lives, the way they're feeling, what they know about the hockey, what's going on, is fundamental if you're going to build a relationship. And only really once you've established an understanding of them are they likely to become interested in your view of the world. They may be interested from a sort of a functional perspective. What do I need to go do to get picked? But you need to move beyond that. And again, when I think about my context, currently we're at 28 full-time funded athletes, and I had 14 staff on that. To maintain that level of relationships is impossible. And so other staff will have slightly better relationships with other athletes and vice versa. And so you just ensure that those where the connections are good and relationships are good, you work those. Rather than thinking, head coach, I've got to have a brilliant relationship with everyone. It becomes impossible.
Yeah, and is that part by part strategic and part natural, or is that sort of defined? Right?
It's both. It's staff meetings where we discuss. We go through athletes. We have these athlete catch-up meetings where we'll go through each athlete individually, case by case, and we'll decide which people who will talk to who, and And some athletes, understandably, want the head coach. They want to what they need that. And other athletes at the other end of the spectrum, they really, just keep me away from the head coach. And that those relationships change over time. Certainly, I know for a fact there are some of the Olympians from Rio that would have said their relationship with me at X point in time would have changed from another point in time, just as they mature and grow, and I mature and grow, and how those relationships shift and change. But fundamentally, I always use that phrase: is understand them first, seek to understand them first, and then organically also. So I sort of said formally through staff, and then organically also. So you can literally be out on a pitch, you'll overhear a conversation. You think, okay, what's going on there? You'll sort of tap into your network of people that will understand a little bit more, and then decide, okay, actually, would you mind following up on that?
Yeah, and you picked up that you were the author there. Where do you get your sort of leadership, not advice necessarily, but sort of influences from? Is it evolving all the time? It sounds like it is. But do you actively go out looking for leadership books and influencers?
100%. And they come from very many different strange places. between 2006 2009, I was very fortunate. I was on sounds a bit ostentatious, but the UK Sport had a cohort, a program called Elite Coach. There was 10 of us on that cohort, and we just had this 3 years of just stuff thrown at us, the most incredible sort of opportunity imaginable. And that sort of really lit my burners about, just curiosity around leadership. And it is literally from reading, it can be from interacting with other people in other domains. So one of the most interesting domains has been some of the medical world. So, understanding, especially in high pressure situations like in theatre, I'm not saying they always have it right, but there's a reason they do what they do, and it's evolved the way it's evolved. From airline pilots, quite a bit of time with military, other sports. I spend quite a bit of time in rugby domains, all over the place. So lots of books. Really, if any of you've read Turn the Ship Around by David Marquette, that's a really, really good book. He's now got a follow-up one, I think, The Language of Leadership. A whole raft of different things. I think that often when I'm asked to talk about leadership and they sort of say, could you boil it down for me? And I'll say it's about range and your ability to flex and have range depending on the context at the time. Is you tapping into that range of knowledge, experience, and then deploying it at the right time.
Excellent. I'm just conscious of time. Perhaps just to round off the session for the last couple of minutes, maybe even there's just a final question. What are then the biggest opportunities that business leaders can learn from being in a sporting environment, how that can be transferred into a business, if that makes sense?
Yeah, my experience, and again, it's not that broad, but my experience is when I've gone into different industries is I sometimes feel like the culture that abounds hasn't been built from the bottom up. It feels very much sort of the board has decided these are the values, this is the mission, this is the intent, and it doesn't feel like it's being built collaboratively. Now, when you've got the scale of multinational companies, you might argue, well, that's really difficult to do. I think if you take a more creative view to that, even within multinationals, you've got different centres, different bodies, and they can have all their own unique identities. And if you really believe in the quality of your environment and culture, then you can allow them to have their own unique identities in different areas and build that from the bottom up. And I think that's something in hockey, sort of more collaboratively building the programme and using athletes, using staff, we've done well. Can always do it better, and that's the biggest thing. The difference when I go into the world of business, I often feel it feels a little bit from top down rather than bottom up, and so there doesn't appear to feel sort of ownership or proud to be part of something. It's like it feels more transactional to me. It feels like I'm here because I'm paid, not I've got to bounce in my step. I feel invested in this company. I love what I do. I love the people I work with. It often doesn't feel like that. I could be wrong. The places I've been could be the outliers, but that's my sense.
Danny Kerry, thank you. That's been
Thanks.
fantastic. We've overrun slightly, but not as horrifically as I thought I might. We know my timekeeping. So as the lights go out, that's a perfect point at which to say thank you very much. Thank you to everybody for listening in. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Hopefully,
yeah, I enjoyed it too, and I hope I hope I sort of answered the questions in a way that may provoke some thought. So no worries.
Almost certainly. I think we could go on for a lot longer, but we'll draw a close there. Thank you very much. Thanks to everybody for listening in, and see you soon.
Thanks, Duncan. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.